You're not watching this by accident. You noticed that before you clicked.
Not as a thought, as a quiet pause.
Like something inside you leaned forward first. There's been a strange neutrality lately. Not peace, not confusion, just less friction. Things that used to pull at you don't pull the same way. Reactions arrive slower. Sometimes they don't arrive at all, and you didn't decide that. This video isn't here to explain anything. It's here because something already shifted, and your attention is catching up. At first it felt like waiting, like standing in a hallway between rooms. Nothing wrong, nothing happening, just a sense that the noise dropped out before the meaning did. You still go through your days, you still speak, choose, respond, but there's a thin distance now. Not dissociation, not detachment, more like watching your life from half a step back. You may have called it tiredness, or boredom, or growth, but none of those quite fit. There's been more silence in your reactions, more space between impulse and response, not because you're trying to be calm, because something else is holding the center now, and you didn't train it, you didn't earn it, you didn't do the work for it. It simply arrived, not dramatically, quietly, like a background hum you only notice once it stops. Somewhere in the last year or two, effort stopped working the way it used to. Not failing, just losing its grip. Pushing harder didn't move things faster. Overthinking didn't bring clarity. Even desire softened, not disappeared, softened. And the strangest part is that nothing external had to collapse for this to happen. Life didn't need to break. Your inner orientation simply rotated a few degrees. Enough to change what you notice, enough to change what feels real. Around minute 3, people usually expect an explanation, a reveal, a reason. But what's unfolding here isn't new information. It's recognition. And recognition never rushes. If you're honest, you've sensed this before in small flashes, moments where time felt thinner, where you caught yourself observing your own thoughts instead of being carried by them, moments where identity felt adjustable, not lost, not dissolved, just less rigid, as if the self you've been protecting isn't the one steering anymore. There's a word people reach for when this starts happening: awakening, transition, contact. But words tend to arrive late. The experience always comes first. And the experience is subtle. It shows up as neutrality where there used to be resistance, as patience you didn't practice, as a lack of urgency where urgency once lived. You're still choosing, still acting, still moving through time, but the center you're choosing from feels quieter, less personal. Here's something you may have noticed without framing it. You don't need reality to reassure you as much anymore. Approval doesn't land the same. Rejection doesn't cut as deep. Even anticipation has changed texture. It's not that you don't care, it's that caring isn't hooked into survival the way it used to be, as if part of you stepped out of the mirror and started watching the reflection instead. Every 60 seconds or so, your mind may try to label this, to organize it. That's normal. But notice this instead. The moment you try to define what's happening, it dulls. And when you let it remain undefined, it stays alive. That's not an accident. Some experiences can only be felt when left unnamed. You may have also noticed a quiet grief, not sadness exactly, more like saying goodbye to a version of yourself you don't need to be anymore. The one who had to figure everything out. The one who needed certainty before moving. The one who believed alignment came after effort. That version did its job, and it's not gone. It's just not in charge. Around 10 minutes in, something usually happens for the listener. Not excitement, not revelation, a settling, as if the nervous system recognizes a familiar frequency. This is one of those moments, because what's being mirrored here isn't a future state, it's a present one. You're already standing in it. The threshold isn't ahead of you, you're on it. And thresholds don't announce themselves. They're felt as pauses, as liminal spaces, as nothing happening moments that somehow feel important. Time itself has been behaving differently for you, hasn't it? Days blur together, then suddenly sharpen. Weeks disappear, then one conversation feels unusually dense. This isn't time speeding up or slowing down, it's your relationship to it changing. You're no longer inside the current the same way, you're noticing the flow from a slightly higher vantage point. Not above life, alongside it. Here's a subtle truth you may recognize without agreeing with. Reality hasn't been responding to your effort lately. It's been responding to your state, not what you want, not what you affirm, not what you push for. but what you are when no one is watching. That's why forcing outcomes feels exhausting now. That's why alignment feels quieter than motivation ever did. There's a reason the idea of contact feels less like arrival and more like remembering. If consciousness is a field, not a possession, then interaction doesn't require distance. It requires resonance, and resonance doesn't shout. It hums, softly enough that you almost miss it if you're still searching for signs. Pause for a moment, not intentionally, just notice. Notice that you're listening without trying to extract meaning. That wasn't always the case. You used to listen to understand, to learn, to fix. Now you listen to recognize. That shift alone changes everything. At around 20 minutes, there's usually a temptation to ask, so what does this mean? But meaning is downstream. What's upstream is orientation, and your orientation has already changed. You're less interested in becoming someone, more interested in being where you are without distortion. That's not passivity, it's precision. Some people describe this phase as nothing happening. They're not wrong from the outside, but internally something has reorganized. Identity feels more like a channel than a container. Choice feels lighter. The future feels less like a goal and more like a direction already in motion. You don't feel lost. You feel unanchored from old anchors. This is where the idea of parallel paths quietly enters awareness. Not as science fiction, as lived experience. You felt versions of yourself you could step into, not imagined, sensed. Different responses, different lives, different rhythms. And lately, choosing between them feels less dramatic, more obvious, as if alignment is less about deciding and more about allowing the most natural version to lead. There's a reason suffering feels different now. It doesn't feel like punishment. It feels like friction, like trying to steer against a current you can already feel the direction of. That's not failure, that's feedback. And feedback doesn't judge, it informs. If you've come across the idea of collective awakening, it may not resonate intellectually, but you've felt something collective, haven't you? A quiet sameness in conversations, a shared fatigue with old narratives, a sense that many people are pausing at once, even if they don't know why. This isn't synchronization by agreement, it's resonance by state. Somewhere in all of this, the concept of effort softened. You still act, still choose, still participate, but effort no longer feels like force. It feels like flow with awareness. That's why the idea behind parallel realities doesn't feel like a book to you. It feels like a continuation of something you're already living, not instruction, reflection. There's nothing to do with this awareness. That's the part the mind struggles with. No technique, no practice, no next step. Just noticing what's already different. How reactions land, how silence feels fuller, how identity feels less tight around the edges. As this video moves toward its final moments, notice something subtle. There's no conclusion forming, no takeaway assembling itself. And yet, something feels complete, not finished, complete. Like a circuit that closed quietly while you were listening. You won't leave this with answers. You'll leave with a different quality of attention, and that attention will keep unfolding after the screen goes dark, in conversations, in pauses. In moments where you realize you're responding from a place that didn't exist for you before. The threshold year isn't a date, it's a state. And states don't begin when you name them. They begin when you notice you're already inside them. You didn't learn something new here, you recognized what was already happening. And recognition doesn't end. It continues. There's a particular kind of quiet that only appears after something has already moved, not the silence of waiting. The silence of adjustment. You may have felt it in moments that didn't seem important at the time, standing in a room without checking your phone, listening to someone speak and realizing you weren't preparing a response, noticing a choice appear fully formed without debate. Those moments didn't announce themselves. They blended in, and that's why they matter. At some point, the need to understand what's happening softened, not disappeared, softened. You're still curious, but curiosity no longer carries anxiety. It feels clean now, unattached, like looking at the horizon without needing to know what's beyond it. There's an old reflex the mind has, to assume that if nothing dramatic is happening, nothing meaningful is happening. But your experience lately contradicts that. Some of the deepest shifts don't arrive with intensity. They arrive with ease. They arrive as the absence of tension you didn't realize you were carrying. You might remember how certain patterns used to repeat, the same emotional loops, the same internal arguments, and now they don't grip the same way. They still appear, but they pass through faster, as if they're no longer finding the hooks they used to rely on. Here's a gentle reorientation, not instruction, just noticing. When identity loosens, perception sharpens. Not outwardly, inwardly. You notice how you're noticing. That shift alone changes the entire field of experience. You may have sensed that something about choice feels different now. Not heavier, lighter. Almost as if the right choice doesn't need justification anymore. It doesn't argue for itself. It simply fits. And when something fits, the body knows before the mind agrees. This is often where people go looking for confirmation, signs, messages, external validation. But what's unfolding here doesn't rely on external markers, because the confirmation is internal. It shows up as coherence, as the sense that fewer parts of you are pulling in opposite directions. If you're honest, you've been less interested in proving who you are, less invested in defending a story, not because you don't have one, but because you no longer need it to hold your sense of self together. Identity feels more like a reference point than a fortress. Around now, the idea of contact may feel different than it once did, not as something arriving, but as something already present that no longer needs translation. If consciousness is a field, then recognition is simply tuning. No distance crossed, no barrier breached, just resonance noticed. There's a subtle humility in this phase, not shrinking, not minimizing, just the quiet understanding that you were never as isolated as you once felt, and you were never meant to figure everything out alone, not because someone else would explain it, but because awareness itself carries intelligence. Notice how this doesn't create urgency. There's no rush to act on this, no need to change your life overnight, because what's changed isn't your circumstances, it's your relationship to them, and that's the kind of change that integrates slowly, naturally. Another gentle reset just to notice, you're still listening, not waiting for a payoff, not scanning for answers, just present. That wasn't always easy for you. This phase often feels like standing on a bridge without looking down. You can sense movement, but you're not measuring distance. You trust the structure without inspecting every beam. That trust didn't come from belief, it came from experience. The idea of parallel versions of self may surface here, not as theory, but as sensation. Moments where you can feel how close another response was, another tone, another path. And choosing doesn't feel dramatic, it feels obvious, as if alignment selects itself when resistance steps aside. You may have noticed fewer emotional spikes, not numbness, stability, the kind that doesn't depend on circumstances behaving. That stability isn't suppression, it's integration. If suffering appears now, it feels informational rather than personal, like feedback from a system that's already oriented toward balance, not punishment, not failure, just adjustment. Somewhere in this, the concept of future softened too. You still plan, still imagine, but the future feels less like a destination and more like an unfolding continuation of now, as if time is cooperating rather than pressuring. This is why effort-heavy approaches stopped resonating. They belonged to a phase where force compensated for misalignment. That phase did its work. This one operates differently, quietly, precisely. If you ever open parallel realities in this state, it won't feel like reading. It will feel like recognizing familiar terrain described in a different language. Not instruction, reflection. We're not moving toward a conclusion here. There's no arc closing, because this awareness doesn't resolve, it stabilizes. And from stability, new perception keeps emerging. Stay with that feeling, not intentionally. Just notice that it's already here. The sense that nothing is missing, that nothing needs to be added, that what's unfolding isn't loud, but it's real. And it's continuing, even now. There's a moment that tends to arrive quietly after everything we've already touched. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't feel like progress. It feels like orientation, as if your inner compass recalibrated without asking for permission. You may have noticed that your attention no longer scatters the way it used to, not because distractions disappeared, but because fewer things successfully pull you out of yourself. You still notice noise. You just don't move toward it automatically. That difference matters more than it sounds. At some point, observation stopped feeling passive. You're not standing back from life, you're standing with it. Present, but not entangled. Engaged, but not fused. It's a strange balance, and once felt, it's hard to unfeel. Here's something subtle that often goes unnoticed. Your internal dialogue softened its tone. Less commentary, less narration, more space between thoughts. That space isn't emptiness, it's capacity. This is usually where people expect something external to happen. A confirmation, a shift in circumstances, a visible sign. But the sequence has reversed. Inner coherence arrived first. Outer reality hasn't caught up yet. And that's not a delay. That's alignment leading instead of following. A gentle reorientation here, just noticing, nothing to do with it. When perception stabilizes, reality reorganizes around it naturally. No force required. No waiting required either. Just time allowing the echo to form. You might feel slightly out of phase with old conversations now. Topics that once energized you feel flat. Debates that once mattered feel repetitive. Not because you're above them, because they belong to a version of you that needed them. And that version is no longer dominant. There's also a growing trust in not knowing, not confusion, comfort. The kind that doesn't rush to fill silence. The kind that lets uncertainty breathe without labeling it as a problem. That trust didn't come from philosophy. It came from lived evidence. Somewhere here, the idea of control quietly loosened. Not responsibility, control. You still participate fully, but you no longer feel responsible for managing every outcome, as if life is responding better when you stop micromanaging the reflection. This is often where the mirror metaphor becomes experiential. You notice that when you soften internally, situations soften too. Not always immediately, not always dramatically, but consistently, as if reality responds to tone more than intention. Another soft retention moment settles here, almost unnoticed, because you can feel there's a deeper layer still unfolding. Not later, soon, but not yet accessible, and strangely, you're okay with that. There's a quiet dignity in this phase, not achievement-based, presence-based. You don't need to convince yourself that you're changing. You can feel it in how little effort it takes to stay centered. You may also notice a subtle increase in synchronicity, not flashy coincidences, subtle alignments, right timing, right phrasing, right pauses, as if the field around you is slightly more cooperative, not because it owes you anything, because resistance thinned. Here's another gentle reset. Notice how you're still here, still listening, without anticipation. That's not boredom, that's regulation. Your system isn't seeking stimulation, it's recognizing coherence. The idea of path changes here. It stops feeling linear, less like steps, more like a trajectory you're already on, regardless of moment-to-moment choices, as if many small decisions are being made from the same quiet center now. Parallel versions of self don't feel hypothetical anymore. They feel adjacent, close enough to sense, and choosing between them doesn't require effort. It requires honesty. Which response feels lighter? Which feels clean? The body answers faster than the mind. This is also where compassion deepens without sentimentality. You see how everyone is responding from their own alignment, or lack of it. Judgment feels unnecessary, not morally wrong, just inefficient. Suffering when it appears feels like friction against your own knowing, not punishment, not lesson, information. And information doesn't ask to be dramatized, just noticed. You may realize that you're less interested in becoming more spiritual, more evolved, more anything. You're more interested in being accurate. Accurate to your internal state, accurate to your perception. That accuracy creates its own kind of peace. This is why concepts like awareness, field, mirror, reflection keep appearing, not as ideas to adopt, as descriptions for something you're already experiencing. Language catching up to sensation. If at any point you sense that this awareness feels familiar, that's because it is. Not remembered from the past, recognized from beneath identity, like returning to a room you've always lived in, but rarely sat quietly enough to notice. We're moving closer now to the place where nothing needs to be said, not because there's nothing left, but because what's unfolding doesn't translate cleanly into words, it translates into being. Let that land however it lands. no conclusion forming, no takeaway assembling, just the sense that this conversation hasn't ended. It's simply moved inward, and it's continuing. There's a particular kind of continuity that doesn't ask to be closed. You felt it before. When a conversation ends, but something in you keeps listening, that's the space we're in now. Nothing new needs to happen from here for what already happened to keep unfolding. That matters, because part of you is still waiting for an event, a marker, something external that confirms what's already been felt. But what shifted in you doesn't need confirmation. It recognizes itself in quiet. You may have noticed you're not trying to hold on to this experience. You're not memorizing lines, not turning it into an idea. That's perceptual maturity. When something is true for you, it doesn't need to be fixed in place. It stays on its own. There's a subtle difference between waiting and allowing. Waiting looks forward. Allowing rests in now. And the strange thing is, when you allow, the later reorganizes by itself, not as a promise, as a natural consequence. You didn't become someone else by listening to this. You simply stopped stepping away from what was already here, and that changes everything. At some point, today or on an ordinary day that doesn't stand out, you'll notice yourself responding differently to something. Without thinking, without choosing deliberately. Only later will you realize that wouldn't have happened that way before. That's the effect, not instant, not dramatic, integrated. The idea of 2026 as a threshold year isn't about the calendar. It's about internal position. It's the moment you stop looking for the door because you realize you've been on the inside all along. Contact, in this sense, isn't an encounter. It's alignment quiet enough to stop distorting the signal, and the signal was never absent. You don't need to take anything from here. Nothing to apply, nothing to remember on purpose. What's real has already settled at its own pace. And if days or weeks from now you feel a strange familiarity with the world, as if you're slightly more at home inside yourself, don't look for the cause, just recognize it. This wasn't a beginning, it was a point of perception, and points of perception don't conclude. They keep opening quietly while you live. The conversation didn't end. It simply stopped needing words. If something in you recognized itself while listening, you don't need to explain it. Just let it be seen. You can gently support this space by liking the video or leaving a comment if any part of this felt familiar to you. And if you know someone who moves through these questions quietly, someone who notices more than they say, sharing this with them might land exactly where it needs to. This channel exists for moments like this, not answers, recognition. So if you feel drawn to continue, there are other conversations here that meet you in the same place, not to lead you anywhere, but to walk beside what you're already noticing. Because once perception shifts, you don't go back to searching. You start recognizing. And that recognition tends to keep unfolding each time you return.